welcome everyone to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate, but so we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those tragedies and challenges you faced or are facing, don't define you. They refine you. And in fact, they also can launch you. That's the focus of the series we're in right now, which we're calling Second Act Significance. The idea there is that you can find meaning and purpose after dead ends and brick walls. You can move on from one movement in your life to the next movement in your life. And we're featuring guests who not only have had crucible experiences, but also are living right now in their second act significance. No one knows better than how all of those things come together than someone who's lived it and someone who's created the platform through which we talk about it. And that is the founder of Crucible Leadership and the host of the show, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, this is going to be a fun one. I'll explain why I think it's going to be a fun one after you say hi.
I completely agree. Very much looking forward to it.
So it's going to be a fun one because our guest listener today is Melissa Reaves, she resides in Seattle, Washington, and is a professional storyteller and storytelling coach to executives and entrepreneurs. She started Story Fruition when she noticed that storytellers in business are highly needed because we'll remember your story far longer than your pie chart. Love that line already. She coaches execs globally and has helped raise over $45 million in capital for her founders in less than 3 years using storytelling. Most of the pitch presentations she creates are only 99 seconds, but have a huge impact. As a personal storyteller, Melissa is known for rich characters and a balance of humor and poignant emotions to deliver stories that share her life journey and truths. Melissa appears frequently on The Moth, Risk, NPR, PBS, and dozens of storytelling shows. Melissa's business book, The Storyteller's Mind Movie, is due out this summer in 2022. She's the proud mom of 2 great kids and 2 great cats. Melissa loves to hear them tell stories too. Warwick, start telling stories. Start asking questions.
Well, Melissa, firstly, just thank you so much for being here and really looking forward to getting into Story Fruition and Melanin Stories Matter. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I'm thrilled to be here.
So before we get into Story Fruition and what you do, you tell stories. And so I'm always curious, a bit like a movie, sort of the origin story behind Melissa Reaves. I mean, you had a very successful career before you pivoted, but what are some of the strands in your life growing up that you feel are sort of woven into who you are now? And there tends to be an origin story of who we are and what makes us, if you will.
Yeah, I call the origin story your story fruition. That's where and how you got to who you are, and that's why I named my company that. Yeah.
Perfect.
But yes, are you asking like childhood moments that indicated?
I mean, things that you feel like is relevant to your future life, if you will. Some of the elements that had fruition in your story later on.
Yes. Well, I was about 7 years old, and my father was in sales and marketing his whole career. He was a Harvard MBA, just like you.
Oh, okay.
And one day I was asking him for something, and he said, "Honey, you need to go into sales." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you just don't hear no." And then when I went into middle school, remember how a lot of kids will go around and they'll sell wrapping paper or candy? Well, I had to sell magazine subscriptions. And I knocked on this door. It's about 5 o'clock in the neighborhood. This guy answers. He's tired. You can tell he's just gotten home from work. And I am telling him, "I'm here to sell you magazine subscriptions." I am the last thing he wants to see. He just wants to sit down and relax. So he says, no, that's okay. And he shuts the door on me. And as I'm walking down the hill, I'm like, that did not go well. That did not go well. And then I started thinking about, he seemed a little tired. He needs to relax. So I go back up to the door. I knock. He's like, "You're back?" I'm like, "You know what, sir? I know you've had a really long day and you just want to put your feet up and probably watch some TV tonight, right?" He's like, "That is exactly what I want to do." I go, "Then you need a subscription to TV Guide." And I pointed to him and he buys because he was like, "That's tenacity." So yes, so my father was right. And I ended up heading towards sales and marketing in my career. However, there was this other element that we had to deal with. I was an actor. I started acting at 9 years old. I was the lead in every show all the way through high school. And I ended up having to get to Michigan because my parents were like, "Just get there." And I was like, "But I don't really have the grades. Did you see my ACT scores?" They're like, "Yeah, we're going to ignore that. Just get into Michigan."
As in
So
University of Michigan, obviously.
University of Michigan.
Yeah.
And literally I had no ACT scores. That was like walking into a nightmare. I had not taken chemistry or any of the math courses that the ACT score would have. So I take this test, doesn't go well, but the universe started working with me, I think. And the University of Michigan started to launch their musical theater department. I was a musical theater girl. So I went in and I auditioned for musical theater and I got in. And I was able to show my parents, "Okay, I'm going to Michigan." But my dad's like, "But that's a hobby. That's a hobby. That's not like a real degree. You're going to have to get in and like go to business school." And I'm thinking, great. All right. So I get into Michigan and I actually realized I'm not that good in musical theater. I had about 8 great notes. and then once you went past those, I was a little messed up, but I was always a good actor. I ended up leaving that program and floating my way through, and my degree ended up being whatever my instinct was telling me to take. I really have been kind of someone who floats through life trusting that it's going to work out if I listen. So I ended up doing psychology and marketing and journalism and acting. I kept the theater. And all of those things are true today in what I do every day with my clients. All of that all plays into storytelling.
That is fascinating. So as you look at your parents, were either one of them into acting or selling? I mean, can you see some genes that were passed on? I mean, or in grandparents, aunts and uncles? Where did that come from, do you think?
Yeah, you know what? I do think that there's some DNA in that because my youngest is a musical theater kid and she's actually really good. She can dance, sing, and act. I was like, I can kind of sing and I can definitely act. Forget dancing. My mother, she did a little theater. My dad, though, was definitely sales and marketing. I mean, I mentioned earlier, he was a Harvard MBA. He was VPs of sales organizations and whatnot. So that gene came through pretty clear. And then we have a relative that apparently was, I don't know if she was on Broadway, vaudeville. I think she was on vaudeville.
Wow.
So it has been in the family.
Amazing, amazing. So, so those are some definite strands. So, so there are all these things. There's acting, there's business psychology, and so you went down the sales and marketing route. Do you think if your dad hadn't have said, "Oh, acting is not a real job," would you have pursued acting or not necessarily?
Oh, absolutely. So what I did was I kind of did a hack. I was like, all right, I'll get your sales and marketing in. And I realized I liked eating. So actually that wasn't a bad thing. And so I'm in Southern California. And what I was doing was I was selling advertising space for multiple publications, newspapers, 4-color magazines, slick ones. You know, I did that during the day, but at night I was in the theater all the time. And then finally I meet my future husband and he played my brother in a play, and that was great. And we decided we're going to go to LA and we're going to go for it. And we get to LA and it is not anything like I thought it was going to be. I was suddenly this little fish in a big ocean of actors, and I didn't care for it, to be honest. Like, I wanted to be in sitcoms. I didn't really care about movies. And it just wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. But my career in sales was taking off. I was a superstar at LA Weekly. And then they called me in one day and they said, "We're going to start Orange County's newspaper. It's going to be OC Weekly. And we think that you should be the advertising director." Now I'm almost 30 years old and I'm thinking, oh, that's amazing. And she says, but you're going to have to move to Orange County. I said, oh, really? You mean leave earthquakes, floods, fires, riots, and slow speed chases from O.J. Simpson and give up my crappy auditions? I'm in.
And you're closer to Disneyland.
I actually lived almost behind it. So when they would have a home run at the baseball field, they'd shoot off all the fireworks. That was my backyard.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I went to Orange County and I started the advertising director position for OC Weekly, which it just closed. I mean, a lot of publications went down after COVID and digital and whatnot. But yeah, so my dad was right. He's like, I knew you'd be good at that. But I started to miss my acting. I kind of put it all on hold. I couldn't even go to the theater. Couldn't even go because it just hurt because I should be on that stage, right? I should be on that stage, but I'm making so much more money not being on that stage. So I kind of gave into it, had a family, became, the breadwinner of the family, had a marriage for quite a long time. And then things started to change.
I mean, it's sort of fascinating in that I guess I'm an idealist at heart, and I have 3 kids, and obviously I grew up in a family business where you could do anything you wanted to, so long as it was the heir apparent to a billion-dollar family media business. I mean, there was only one story you got to live. That was the story that I inherited from generations. So with my kids who are like 30 down to 20s, I want them to do whatever they want to do. So I'm very into whatever you want to do, whatever you love. It's all about that. Yeah. So I tend to. It's good to be practical. I'm a little bit more in the idealistic, do what you love. But yet, I mean, you tried that, and as you said, it's not easy. Those 40s and 50s movies that we all love, somebody comes from the middle of nowhere to LA and they get discovered by somebody. It's overnight success. There's this naive young person and all falls into their lap. Well, it's not quite like those old 40s movies. It's tough. So you did try. But it's like, gosh, I do want to eat too. And I mean, that's real life, right? You have a dream, but it's not always easy. And sometimes I love the way you talk about the universe. And, I'm a person of faith, whether it's however you view it, the universe, some divine creator. Yeah. It seems like whoever it is up there, if there is anyone up there, they were using all these strands in your story for later. At the time, it probably felt like, why isn't this working? I guess it's not, oh, well, I got to eat. I do kind of enjoy ad sales. So does that kind of make sense? It probably was frustrating at the time. You didn't realize where your story was going to head later on.
Right.
At the time, it was probably pretty frustrating, right?
Well, I mean, I learned early that there is this divine guidance that I've had, and you can call it whatever you want. I don't think it's outside of me. I know for a fact it's inside of me, and I believe it's inside everybody. And it's constantly giving me signs, and it's sometimes I hear it. It's constantly talking. Just sometimes I've heard it. During COVID, though, I became a lot more self-reflective, and I really got into building my storytelling repertoire. And my inner voice oftentimes comes up in my stories. If you watch any of them, and you can see them on my website, I've personified that character. Like it comes in and it will whisper to me, and it provides a colorful element, I think, in my stories, because people are like, I think I have those same kind of conversations with myself. And so I'm trying to like capture that so that people can also realize we're all figuring it out. We're all swimming in this ocean. And you just got to surrender to it. Not being passive. I'm not saying being passive, but actually being active, being really vibrantly alive is when you really are connected to yourself, I think.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, that deep inner voice, and one can speculate where that comes from. But I think, most people use, scientists say, a very small fraction of their brains. And so there's these levels of intelligence, levels of our persona that we don't really tap into. Again, I'm no, neuroscientist or whatever, but from what I've heard is the brain connects thoughts in ways that's hard to even quantify, that then turns into inner voice or gut instinct. But it's a process. It's not easily understood. It's just, you kind of know when you just have this deep sense. It's processing things in a way that humanly you can't understand how it's processing all this information to form what I think neuroscientists would call our gut instinct. So what you say is so true. So life is going along, you're in ad sales and you're doing well, but then you ran into a bit of a challenge, as we say, Crucible. So talk a bit about that challenge, almost that wall that you hit, in which life, maybe it was, I don't know if it was Disneyland, but it wasn't that bad. But then it turned out to be challenging. So what happened?
Yeah, so my life was going well. I was floating around. I was successful in ad sales, and then that turned into advertising technology. So I went into the internet sales and digital technology because I was fascinated by it. I was like, you mean I can click this thing and go to a website and I can buy something or not? And if I don't buy it, you guys know that, and then you follow me around with an ad? That is so cool. And I was in early stages of advertising technology.
It's not cool when it happens to you though, and you're not the one doing it. Because I'm getting chased by shoe ads all the time now because I bought some new shoes, last week. So
Yes, but if you don't buy them, they may send you a coupon to inspire you because they know you've converted or not. Now, once you've converted, they should stop talking to you and put you in a different bucket. Anyways, that's data sales. So I learned how to do that. And I did that, in the early 2000s, all the way through about 20. Well, I'm going to tell you when I got there. And it was exciting, but after a while, and I rose all the way to the level of like Oracle. I had climbed to the top of ad technology, but it started getting more crowded. It started getting less fun. It was no longer the shiny penny. It was a penny that everyone was fighting for the scraps based on who clicked on that ad and who converted. And you were up against the Googles, the Yahoos. There was a whole bunch going on. And it became, I don't know, boring for me after a while because I had done it. I had done it for 15 years. And then when you start to lose your joy, you start to dim in your light. Right? Getting up now was becoming not joyous. I wasn't springing out of bed. I was getting out of bed. I didn't want to do something. I had to do something. And I started to kind of just dim. And I think a lot of people go through that. Now I'm also starting to approach 50. And you start to look at your life. Like, what have I done? What have I accomplished? And what haven't I accomplished? And I'd accomplished 2 beautiful children. I'd had a career. I'd built a home. I'd been the financial breadwinner. I am woman, hear me roar. I can bring them the bacon and fry it up in a pan. I'm the Angeli girl. Ugh. And my marriage started to kind of wane, and things started to unravel there. I ended up divorcing after almost 24 years together, and it wasn't a friendly divorce. It was a fiery, crashing divorce. And then I went into my apartment, and then I managed to get a job. It was a little bit different. It wasn't ad tech, it was marketing technology, but it was the job that kind of, if someone tripped over their technology cord and it unplugged, they'd call us. I'm like, oh, okay. And it was different, and it was very left brain, which is good for me to do, but I just didn't really like it. And it wasn't a fit because my light was dim. I was not honoring the joy in myself, but I didn't know what that joy was. I couldn't get an answer other than I needed complete change. So it's January 2nd, 2019, and I'm on the phone and I am angry. In fact, I am hanging up and I am crying because I have just been fired from that job. And I don't like that job, but I need that job. That job pays the bills. I have, money to pay for my divorce. And this isn't good. And at that moment in my panic and what am I going to do? That voice said, don't worry about it. We couldn't watch you anymore. You were miserable. So we got you a pink slip. Yay. I'm like, no, yay. It's like, no, you did. You trust us. It's going to be okay. Well, meanwhile, my youngest child, my baby, is bedridden. She can't get out of bed because she's so stressed out and has OCD, which my DNA had passed to her. I actually have told stories about OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. And it's not something that people should joke about. So she's down, she can't get out of bed, and I have to get a new job, and I am having a really hard time because not only is my light dimmed, it's portrayed in the job interviews, and everyone that I'm interviewing with is a 32-year-old guy named Ryan, Brian, or Eric. It didn't matter, same guy, different body. And he'd just look at me and be like, I do not see her at the bar speaking sports with me at the end of the day. And I'm like, yeah, you're right, man. I'm like old enough to be your mom. And I don't care about who clicked that ad. And I can't get a job that I do like because it's going to require a lot of travel. And my girl needs me. We've got to be at this program 4 days a week, 3 hours a day, and then 2 hours of homework for exposure therapy to get her through this crushing OCD. I was terrified. And I had $50,000 in credit card debt. Terrified. What am I going to do? The plane has crashed and I have got to walk out of this smoldering fire.
So,
Go ahead.
This is the pivot point of your story in the series called Second Act Significance, right? That's kind of,
Yeah.
You talked about your first act, very successful. Now we're kind of at intermission. You've had a crisis. The curtain comes down. We got a little bit of an intermission, and you're going to move into your second act. And your second act, as you've hinted at, talked about, deals with storytelling. And I just want to make an observation about your storytelling before you and Warwick talk about it more. And that is, we have a form that we ask guests to fill out for every show. And the idea behind that form is so that we can ask informed questions of you, so that we're not just kind of flying blind. We don't ask, what 10 things do you want us to ask us? We don't want it to be too programmatic. We want this to be a conversation, but we want to know your story. And I have to tell you, Melissa, I've been co-host of this show for 110 episodes, which is more than 80 guests.
That's a lot.
And your prep sheet is by far the best we've ever received. Your prep sheet is Academy Award winning worthy in terms of prep sheet writing, because what's on display here is exactly the thing that you've talked about, that you're going to talk about, your passion, your fire, your joy. You don't answer questions in this sheet, you tell stories. And that's a fantastic thing. So I'm going to shut up now, let Warwick ask you questions, and let you tell some more stories.
Well, that is so well said, Gary. So,
Thanks, Gary.
before we talk about story fruition, I'm fascinated how you describe almost like this Greek chorus, in Greek tragedies, there's like a chorus of sort of interspersed there to amplify maybe the plot of what's happening. But I almost felt like you had this internal chorus that was saying, I know this may feel like it sucks and it's so painful, but it's for your good. And you're saying, say what? That makes no sense. I think many of us may not term it that way, but we have the inner voice wherever we are from. And sometimes it tells us things that are unexpected, that make no sense to us, which makes it think, okay, if this is me, it's a me I'm not actually aware of, consciously.
Yeah. Right.
But this was really hard. You have a daughter that has significant OCD. You're spending days, hours in a week dealing with this. How in the world can you have a regular job like that? Well, you can't.
Right.
You've got a very painful divorce, and there's money going out, which obviously, without getting into all the details, you go through a painful divorce. Sometimes not only is it emotionally devastating, it's often financially devastating too. It
I lived
happens.
on credit cards. Yeah, I lived on credit cards.
And so you're in this job with some, young guy that it's looking at you saying, this looks like a mom, not some, young guy, tech, sort of the bit of the ageism, sexism, maybe all rolled into one. But and so that was pretty tough. So it would have been, one of the things we say on Crucible, on Beyond the Crucible, when you're in your pit, your worst day, it felt like it was pretty bad. It's easy to hide under the covers and get angry and bitter. Okay, why did I have to go through this bitter divorce? Why do I have to be paying all this money out? Why do I have to have a daughter that's OCD? I love her very much, but why do I have to deal with this now? And why do I have to, have these, seemingly stupid young people with these, prejudices about things? Why? That would have been an easy road, an easy story for you to take. The story of anger, of bitterness, and that could have been Melissa Reaves, but yet it wasn't. And that's one of the things I think listeners are fascinated is, how come you didn't take that path of just anger and bitterness about what life had doled out to you? You took a different path. What led you to take a path that ultimately led to Story Fruition? Where did you find that hope from? Because not every, I mean,
Yes.
it's fascinating. You chose hope rather than to dwell in anger and bitterness.
Great question. And I wish I could say, oh, I didn't do that at all. I did get angry. I did. I retreated to my room because Mother Nature put us all in our room called quarantine. Think about what you did, Missy. And I did. And I licked my friend loves it when I do them. I just licked my wounds, and I was sad and I was angry and I was frustrated. But I also know that life is a journey. And so I started to read a lot. I read Think and Grow Rich. I was like, let's read that. And that actually is a great book that then led me to reading things on law of attraction. And I started to learn that the power, you were saying, it's like the two voices. It's like little u, y-o-u, and then big U, y-o-u. That's how I see it now. And so it's with me all the time. I just have to tune into it. And I can do that by the way I feel. So I started to learn how to feel my way towards what I desired. I now knew what I didn't want. I didn't want any of this. I didn't want to have financial crash. I didn't want to feel bad. I didn't want to have a child that didn't have a remedy. I didn't want to have a job I hated. I didn't want that. So what do I want? Immediately, the opposite. So I started to concentrate now on that. Where can I get her help? Okay, we've got that. That started slipping in pretty fast. Thank you, universe. But the job thing was important. So during this time, I'm thinking, well, what am I good at? What am I good at? And I started to make a list. I'm good at sales. I'm good at marketing. I usually always, I know enterprise sales. That's cool. I know how to manage people. That's great. I know how to tell stories. I'm a really good actor. Okay, what am I going to do with that? That's been haunting me my whole life. That's my dad saying, I don't know what you're going to do with that. I'm going to figure it out. I'm standing in the hall of Seattle University's business plan competition, and I'm there to watch these students fight it out for $10,000 prize money. It's a very prestigious competition here in Seattle. It's been going on for a very long time. The biggest, swankiest angel investors are all there. They want to see the next big idea that they might be able to get in on. And as I'm watching, I'm seeing these students one after another get up on stage with a 2-minute pitch, and all they are doing is problem and then saying a bunch of stats, solution, and the pie chart. And I'm just watching and I'm just thinking, it was almost as if a light from the universe came flooding down on me as I watched these students, and I grabbed the arm of the executive director, who was just a budding new friend. And I went, Amelia, I can help them. I know what to do. This is sales and marketing, is it not? She's like, oh, totally. I'm like, and it needs acting. They're not acting. They need story. They need to tell the story. The problem could be a character having the problem, and then they're the hero. I can do this. And I started just like rambling. She ends up calling me during this downtime and says, do you want to really try this? Do you want to volunteer this year and be one of the pitch coaches? I'm like, yes, 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 yes. I walk in to this room and there's 3 teams, and I ask them, so what do you do? And they start to tell me the exact same thing. The stats come out, the graphs come out, nothing's coming out. And then the last guy, Daniel, he's like, well, I want to unite artisan wood makers to people who appreciate art in their furniture. I'm like, well, that's cool. And what is an artisan? Are you an artisan wood maker? He was like, I am. I'm like, great. So I started talking to him. I go, so who's going to be your target audience? And he said, women 25 to 54 making 75K. I'm like, no, no. And then all of a sudden this epiphany was, oh my God, remember when you, Missy, were in your late 20s and you started making money and you looked around your own apartment and said, I do not want to have a milk crate hold my television up. Things are going to change. And I walked into this beautiful, I'm like soul traveling as this guy's talking to me. I walk into this room, this furniture store on Melrose when I was working for LA Weekly. And it's this artisan furniture maker. He couldn't speak hardly any English, but it was the most beautiful pine furniture. Back in the day when, Pottery Barn was flashing it all. I bought an armoire. I bought tables, chairs, desk, bed. I transformed my apartment. I turned it into my castle. And then all of a sudden, as I'm talking to Daniel at the Seattle Business Plan competition, I said, that's your character. That's your target market. Make her come alive in your story. And all of a sudden, everything started to change, and the competition, all of the pitches now were coming in with a story that tells the problem, and then the solution would be the entrepreneur's solution. And I started to realize, I wonder if people, clearly there's a need for this. Would people pay me to do this? And the universe said, yep. And we got a great name for your company. Try this, Story Fruition. I'm like, ooh, I like that. I register, I find it. GoDaddy's like, yeah, that's a good one. And I started my company. And next thing you know, because when you start to follow and you start to feel good, the universe wants more of that feel good. And all of a sudden, clients started just popping in. They just started popping in. And I got a CEO who said, and he knew I was an actor and he'd seen my acting, and he goes, "You're going to what?" I go, "I am going to pitch coach. I'm going to coach storytelling into executives so that they're more compelling." He goes, "I need that." "Really? Like, you're a millionaire." He's like, "I know, but I know I could be better." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And he hires me and he says, "Okay, we're going in for a pitch." He's already sold a company before. This guy he's opened and closed many companies now. He says, "I have all the numbers, you know that, but I need heart. There's no heart in this presentation. We're going into Andreessen Horowitz. What can we do?" And I said, "Well, come on, Tom. You have all those amazing case studies. I now call them case stories. Let's bring those forward and weave them into your presentation to show them that your technology and your team are going to deliver on the goods." He's like, "That's awesome." He does that. He walks out with a verbal that day for $35 million, Series A. And granted, it's not just because Melissa gave him some stories. I know it was a collaboration, but he said, we needed that. And that's when I started to realize, yep, left brain data needs right brain stories. It needs it. It has to balance it. Because as I said earlier, they're going to remember the story that you tell about the problem that you're solving far longer than any pie chart that you put in front of them. They will not remember that. And so now I have executives from all over the world that I'm coaching, and I'm teaching, how to be a storyteller for your keynote, how to infuse stories into your pitch, how to make sure that your graphs or that your slides are also backing up your story and not usurping you because you put the whole kitchen sink on the slide. You're actually being cognizant of what you're doing to the listener. And that's where my book is called The Storyteller's Mind Movie. So the momentum of what I'm doing is continuing to roll forward. And I know that with joy in my heart, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So this is absolutely chapter 2.
I think it's fascinating. As you're telling your story, Melissa, our lives are often more easily understood as we look backwards. Our stories make sense as we look back. They don't always make sense at the time. But as you look back, you have to say to yourself, I would imagine, I get now, I have these strands in my DNA and my personality of storytelling, but also sales, and you enjoy both. And here you've got a perfect marriage of the two. Your storytelling is helping salespeople, executives, venture capitalists, what have you, understand how to sell better through stories. And, obviously, as you would realize, people talk a lot in our culture about ancient wisdom. The way culture is passed on through pretty much every culture that's ever existed on the planet is through stories. My dad was big into, Greek stories and mythology and what have you. And so I sort of grew up and partly on the stories of the Iliad, which is, the story of the Greeks trying to besiege Troy, and then the Odyssey with Odysseus taking 10 years for a variety of reasons. The gods apparently were against him and took him 10 years to get back to his home. But originally when the stories were told, there was no written word at the time. So these stories were told by the elders of the community, to younger folks over hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's part of the Greek culture, part of their story of what it means to be part of the Greek culture mythology. And that's true of probably every culture on the planet. So this whole storytelling it's how we tell the story of who we are, who our culture is, what makes us us.
Yep.
So what you're doing is channeling something that's existed ever since there were human beings many thousands of years ago. Does that kind of make sense? I mean, this is
Absolutely.
It's like we've forgotten we're a collection of stories. That's what makes us who we are, if that makes sense.
We're machines for it. We live them, we want to hear them, we want to tell them. And then when I realized that we all have these stories, and there's no reason why our personal stories, our personal moments cannot be infused into our workday. But people kind of move into like, I'm in work mode. We don't tell stories. And those are the ones that I think you're falling short, where you're not giving credit to the stories and your wisdom that you have been picking up decade after decade, right? You have family stories, marriage stories, first birth stories, college stories, failure stories. There are so many stories that reflect your resilience, your out of the box thinking, your I'm down and out story, and now I'm a hero. So many of those stories. So when I'm working with people, here's the trick, is that first I notice that people aren't valuing their stories. They don't think, especially a lot of women, oh, no one wants to hear my story. Yes, they do, more than you realize. But the trick is that we're not taught in school, believe it or not. We're taught how to write a story and read a story, but how to tell a story, like what you're seeing me do. I'm creating characters, I'm using voices, I've got pausing, I'm using senses. There's things that I'm doing deliberately to be an entertaining storyteller. But all my stories that I've told today have to do with my work world, but they're very personal. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's, again, what you're saying is so powerful. Is I think, you need the left and the right brain, and there are too many people that just go to these sort of analytical facts and figures, and they ignore the emotions of how they're feeling, how they're doing. They ignore the stories of their lives, and ultimately, you know more about selling than I do. Yes, the numbers have to add up. That's a given.
Yeah,
they have to make sense.
That's the science of business. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, you've got to sell to the heart and the mind. If you don't win both, you've not made a sale. And how are you going to appeal to the heart without a story? There's got to be. So it makes complete business sense in a will, but people think, oh, I have a compelling case in my pie charts and my graphs. And look, yeah, I mean, like your dad, I have a Harvard MBA. I get all that. But,
right.
It's not enough. You need to appeal to the heart. How are you going to do that if you don't tell a story? I don't know how you win the heart without a story, without some personal.
Character.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I mean, it seems like in the business world, we've gone so analytical, we've forgotten our heritage, which is told in stories. We just sort of abandoned that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll give a success story. I'm the pitch coach for Founders Live, which is a global pitch competition every month, different markets, about 60 markets, and 5 presenters come up and they give a 99-second pitch. And I coach them in Seattle, and in 99 seconds, we have a story, we have a solution, we have traction, we have accolades, and we have a team and an ask. It all happens in 99 seconds. And there was one gentleman who, his name is Juan, and I just love Juan, and he has this app called Lalo, and Lalo was the name of his father. And essentially, it's an app that would be to memorialize someone. So let's say Aunt Frida's on her final days, you might want to make sure that you have some of Aunt Frida's stories, and you can put them in this app and share them intimately with your family. It's not something that's going to get exposed out onto the net or anything like that. It's an intimate family experience, and you can have photos and chats and all this. And I asked him, I'm like, this is a really good idea. How did you come up with it? I wanted his Story Fruition. And he said, well, I lost my dad when I was 24, about 18 years ago. And I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. He's like, yeah, I was standing at his graveside, and my wife asked me, she's like, hey, Juan, tell me a story about Lalo. I had nothing. And I just sat there and thought, this is terrible. I can't tell stories, because when my dad passed, I lost his empanada recipes. I had a bunch of pictures in a box, but that's not going to serve anyone. And now he's got grandkids he's never going to meet, but I want them to know who he is. And that's when the light of his universe said, start Lalo. So I said, why is that story not in your presentation? Because everything you've shown me today has been all left brain. I mean, seriously, it was all left brains and charts and the algorithm and how it's going to work and the flow charts. And it was just like, oh. And I said, Juan, your story is beautiful. It needs to be in there. He's like, no one would want to hear that. I said, yeah, I think they would. So for his pitch, we started with him saying, I'm standing at the graveside of my father. When my wife asks me, tell me a story about Lalo. And he does that. And right away, that image in the Mind movie of anyone standing at a graveside does what? You can see it, but you can feel it, right? No one's standing at a graveside going, woohoo, how you doing, buddy? It's poignant, right? And he had him with the first sentence. This guy was going from $0 being raised and lots of thanks. It's just a little too early stage for us. He took his Founders Live video that we did, and he had all the other stuff. He had the traction. We had the science of the business in there. It was all there. Made it a video. We put a little music underneath it. He plays guitar, and he put it out on Twitter. In less than 10 days, he had $210,000 in funding. And it was people saying, it was your story. How can I help you? I just lost my dad. I want to be a part of this. So it works.
Wow. So as I think about it, there's been some good stories that have been told for many thousands of years. And I'm sure there's a lot into it, but just at a high level, what are some of the key elements that make for a good story, both in composition and in telling? What are some of the key things? Again, you don't need to get into every detail. That would be part of what you do, but just at a high level.
That would be that 3-hour podcast. if she's too interesting.
I do workshops that take that long. Yes.
Just to give people a taste of, kind of what's these elements of the secret sauce enough that I might want to learn more. What are some of those key components, both the composing a good story and then telling it?
Yeah. Well, first it's the composing it, so first, we all had an aha moment. All stories are centered around that, right? It's like the moment that something hit you and you have to change, or you did just change, something happens, right? So for me, my aha was, I don't like my life right now. I want something different. I know I don't want this, and now I want that. And then all of a sudden the aha started going on, and I started my journey. I formulaically completely buy into the hero's journey story arc from Joseph Campbell. If it's good enough for Pixar and Disney, it's good enough for me. And so when I'm working with my clients, we are always going to be looking for transformation. So the main characters in your story need to be relatable. We need to be able to see them, hear them. We need to know if you as the storyteller like them or not. So your relationship to those characters are important, and what are the stakes? And then we are going to just plot it out like this Mind movie, scene by scene, moving towards the triumph and the transformation. And I plug that in. And so formulaically, when we start to master that, which is where I think where a storyteller goes from being a storyteller to being a masterful mind movie maker. And those are the people I'm seeking. Who wants to be a mind movie maker? Because if you do, then let's talk, right? Do you want people leaning in? Then let's talk. And that takes practice. So stories, a really well-written story is something that advances enough, expands enough, and it entertains, and it educates, and it inspires. That's the whole essence of what we're going for. And then we break it down scene by scene, character by character.
This is a good time for me to ask you this question. Mm-hmm. And that is, and like I'm entertaining myself with the thought that I'm going to throw a question at you that's going to, knock you off balance. I know it's not going to happen because I'm going to ask you to do something, and you'll do it like that because you're very good at what you do. But our series that we're talking about, that this episode of this podcast is part of, is called Second Act Significance. The idea being that there was a first act of your life for all the guests that we've had on the show, and it didn't work out either because some setback happened, some dissatisfaction happened, whatever that was. That first act then led to a crucible of some making, and then here comes the second act, and it's called Second Act Significance. So I'm going to ask you to tell our listeners a story about why and how your second act is more significant and more satisfying than your first act was?
I deep down always thought I would be an entrepreneur. When I was 25 years old, I thought, I have taken Toastmasters. I am an excellent speaker. I am going to teach people Toastmasters, and that's what I'm going to do. And I started my little company, and I had like cards that said Speakeasy. That's what I was going to call it. I didn't really realize that it would probably have like a sexual connotation, and that wasn't the best branding to it. But I was only 25, and I was going to do this. And I then went, I am too young and dumb to do this. No, I'm not ready for it. But she, that entrepreneurial Melissa, was born inside me. So when I was stepping out of the smoldering flames and I started to listen to my higher self, all of a sudden, my second half now is on my terms. It's my life. And if I need to be a little bit selfish to find my joy, then that's what I'm going to do, because I want to be the best mom I can be. I don't want to deal with Brian's and Eric's again that are going to make me feel like I'm not smart, because I am smart, and I am going to attract the clients that I want, and I'm going to be bringing them something that they didn't even know that they needed, but now that they do, they are so excited about the work we're doing. And I walk through most of the day with goosebumps. When I tap a story in one of my clients and we go, oh, there it is so much joy. And even though with being an entrepreneur, you're kind of on a boat ride or a roller coaster, it's going to go up, it's going to down, it's going to swirl. You're going to have good months, you're going to have thin months, but it doesn't matter, because if you're still believing in what you're doing, or I'll just talk for myself. When I started believing in what I was doing with joy and with value, how could this not be the best time in my life? I'm 56 years old. I am just starting. I am just launching. I got a book that's coming out. I'm doing storytelling on lots of podcasts and having a wonderful time teaching something that not everyone's talking about. And I like that.
I feel like there are some really, really important lessons, Melissa, for folks, irrespective of their journey and where they're from, that I think it's important for them to listen to is, when you connect to your inner passion, your inner truth, your inner voice, and you connect that to folks. I wasn't going to say connect that to folks who have that. I'd say that inner voice, that inner passion is going to attract the people that you're meant to attract. The universe is going to see to that. It certainly has for you. You didn't start out with this old business plan saying, okay, I'm going to tell stories because it combines my acting ability and it combines my sales ability, and people raising Series A financing will be perfect because they need to tell better stories. In hindsight, that makes sense. But when you were trying to get out of the smoldering ashes of the previous job and life, it wasn't like, okay, I got it all figured out. It's Series A financing. This is the one, right? It evolved. I mean, you had a thought. I think life is often like an impressionist painting. You had a thought. Yes. Okay, it's something to do with like acting and sales and telling people stories, and you had that epiphany at the university in Seattle, but then it evolved from there. But I think the key, whatever people's situation is, if they're trying to shift to their second act, it's just really understanding what is something that they're passionate about. I said a lot of years ago, because I am an idealist at heart and still am, is, if you're not having trouble going to sleep at night because you're so excited about whatever it is, then, maybe it's not it. Now you don't necessarily have to be, suffer from insomnia to prove that you're actually there, but it should be something that you're really excited about. And the other aspect I reflect on is passion breeds persistence. You're very persistent at what you do because you're passionate about this. This is going to help people. I love it, and it's going to help people. And so, you're good at sales, but this probably takes your selling ability to a whole nother level beyond what it was before. And that was probably already pretty good, if that makes sense. So does that make sense? Just persistence will attract the people you want to attract. Passion will attract the people that you want to attract. It will help drive you forward, and it will give you persistence. Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that to me is going back to the just trust us. just trust us. That inner dialogue that I was having way back at the beginning of it. I'm like, what do you mean trust you? I don't even, who am I talking to? And it was like, just trust it. And when you think about it, when you become aware of something and you start to see signs of it, like for instance, you want to buy a new car. Let's say you're like, I really like Lexus. I want a Lexus car. And then all of a sudden, every radio station, every magazine, and every newspaper has a Lexus ad suddenly there. That's the universe in a way, letting you know your awareness, your ask for it is now heightened and it's now coming forward and you're opened to hearing and seeing it, right? And you kind of get a giggle like, oh, that's so funny. That's so funny. I was just thinking about, oh, right. Okay, cool. Or you can look at the clock and it says 222 or 333. Some people love that. They're like, ooh, numerology, I'm being listened to. I find this fun. Some people, you can just sign it off. That's fine. I personally find that when I'm living really consciously and I'm deliberately trying to create, you have to listen to all that stuff so that it can show up. And then when you see it, bless it. And no, I actually say that life is like a waiter. It gives you what you ordered. And if you don't like what you ordered, send it back to the kitchen. But if you like what you got, tip.
One of the other things that you said, and again, you mentioned this in your prep sheet about, listen to your gut, actually in all capital letters. And, we can get all left-brained. Oh, this doesn't make sense. The numbers don't add up. I'm not talking about like capital raising, but in terms of your life, right?
Yeah.
Oh, how's that going to work? And so I'm not even going to begin to think about listening to my gut and try and make it work. I'm just going to say no, even before I let, it's like a little seed. I'm going to stamp that seed out. I'm going to fry it. I'm just going to make sure it never grows. The seed's going to die. You're going to kill it, and
you pinch it off. You're like,
yeah,
no,
exactly.
Like a little toddler.
But it's like when you hear that inner voice, that deep truth from your gut, listen to it, water it. I think that's what you're really advocating, and that's what your life exemplifies. And, so many guests we've had have said this is even people that have suffered physical tragedies, quadriplegics, paraplegics, and that when they say, gosh, what happened to me was a gift, that I don't comprehend. I'm not saying I even agree with it, but I've heard way too many people say that to just say, oh, they're all, mentally challenged or something. They're nuts, what have you. So I feel like this is another example. Nobody would want to go through what you went through. I'm sure you wouldn't want to do it again, have that gone through that. But somehow I feel like the universe brought that onto you. Maybe without the challenge, maybe you never would be doing what you're doing. Maybe sometimes it takes a smack on the head with a 2x4 to say, okay, Melissa, we want you to go in this other direction, but you're not listening. Okay, we're going to make you listen. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but do you feel a bit of that for some people to shift to their second act sometimes requires a bit of pain to be able to shift?
Absolutely. I think pain is what we launch from. So that's contrast. It's like when we hit contrast, it used to be contrast was bad. Now I start to see that contrast, which is something I don't want. I'm sifting through all these things all day long. And when I hit contrast now and I feel it, like, ooh, that doesn't feel good. I actually, instead of going, I feel bad, now I'm going to lick my wounds again, I actually pay attention to it because it's talking to me. It's letting me know you're not really aligned here. Pay attention right now. And that's been the work with all the reading that I did over this past time. Also, there was this, when I was in my 20s and I was going to go for my acting career in LA, I said to myself, I don't want to look back and wonder if. I don't want to be on my deathbed and wonder, what if I had gone to LA? What if I had given it a go? So I did go to LA, and I didn't make it as an actor, really, but I did make it in sales, and I didn't expect that. And a part of me had been calling out, I'm good in sales, I'm good in sales, I'm good in sales. And so the universe took me on that journey, and you sometimes just have to ride your boat. And now my big mantra is oars in. Get your oars in and allow that boat to be steered, because everything I want is downstream from me, everything. If I can just not try to paddle upstream. And that's when I start pinching it off. I start going, no, I don't like it, or he didn't show up the day that I wanted him to show up, or that money needs to be in my account now. That's pinching it off. And it doesn't serve me. It actually kind of spoils the joy of what I see life being now. I think life is a constant story being written before my eyes. And I actually have the pen.
You know, when
This
you
is the time in the show when I normally say that sound you heard was the captain turning on the fasten seatbelt sign, indicating our time to descend has begun. But come on, we're talking to a storytelling expert. So I'm going to say we've reached the denouement of the story. We're about to end, but we're not quite there yet. Before we get there, though, and Warwick asks you a couple more questions, Melissa, I would be remiss in my duties as co-host if I did not ask you, how can listeners find out more about Story Fruition and about the services you offer?
Thank you. Yeah, so my site is probably the best place. I've got a lot of information at storyfruition.com. And I teach workshops to corporations now because people are realizing that there are stories that companies all tell, but not everyone tells them well. And new people are aching to know more stories. So I'm helping companies now build story libraries, and I train their teams on how to be very vivid mind movie makers, even in a case story, because that's what's going to differentiate. So I always say, I'm like, it's like you're going to create an army of storytellers throughout your organization, and the culture will be infused into your organization across divisions. So those are some of the services I do. And then, you can like me. Story Fruition is on Facebook. It's on LinkedIn. It's, link into me. That would be great. Melissa Reaves, Reaves. And you have to be careful because there is a Melissa Reaves who's a pop star.
Ah.
But that's not me. It's a Melissa Reaves storyteller because sometimes helps.
And can the pop star sing more than 8 notes? Do you know?
Yeah.
Darn it.
Yeah. She plays music. She's really good. Yeah, I like her. I'm like, hey, there's room for joy everywhere. Let's go.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. So just as we sum up, I mean, what you talked about, oars in, I really want the listeners to hear that, because unless you have the oars in and are just moving in some direction, the universe, however you term it, can't steer you. If you're moving nowhere, nobody can steer you. Whatever you think it's a higher power. Right. So I feel like, by just going to LA and trying that, in hindsight, that acting was combined with selling to form Story Fruition. But if you hadn't done that, if you hadn't put your oars in, you wouldn't be where you were. So just put your oars in and try something, and then the universe, however you frame it, will guide you. I think that's such key advice. As we sum up, I love what you do in Story Fruition, but you have another thing you do at Melanin Stories Matter, which I'd love for you to just chat a bit about that, because it would be a whole nother podcast. But from my perspective, when you hear people's stories, it humanizes people. It's hard to dislike somebody whose stories whose heart you understand, Right. It helps people be seen who maybe people don't see, if you will. So just talk a bit about what's the heart behind Melanin Stories and Matter. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was May 25th, 2020, and I'm in front of the television learning the name George Floyd, along with everyone else. And then it wasn't very long after I'm learning the name Breonna Taylor. And not too long after that, I'm learning Ahmaud Arbery. And I just couldn't handle it. I'm like, why are we so mean? Why can't we just be nicer to each other? Like, why? And then my higher self said, well, Melissa, you were raised to be racist. I was? Oh, I was. Yeah, I was. Unfortunately, I was. I have a rich Southern history of family lineage. And I did not grow up learning kind terms, but it never felt right. Me and my sisters would always just cringe whenever a word that was derogatory towards any person of color would be used. And it was just in the family culture. Not that my family was bad. It was just that side. It was not the shining side. So I started to reflect on that. And I thought, you know what? Just because that's how the family was does not mean that's how the family can be. And so I realized that going out to protest was really dangerous. People were getting tear gassed, let alone COVID exposures. But I'm a storyteller and I know how to produce shows. So we said, let's make a protest from our living room, and let's have only Black, Indigenous, and people of color sharing stories of moments that they had to face just because of their melanin being a little bit darker than mine. and the floodgates opened. And I have made so many amazing friends. I had to actually look at my own network and go, God, it's so white. It's so homogenized. And shame on me for that. And we started this show and it took off. We did 7 different shows and we had Your Vote Matters. So as a person of color, what's important to you about voting? And I had a variety of people. I've learned that racism runs within their own cultures. Like, we're all racist a little bit. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to solve racism, but can we start to move towards celebration of our diversity? So Melanin Stories Matter, if you go to YouTube and look that up, you'll see about at least 60 pieces of content from amazing storytellers. Some I coached, some I didn't. They're already players in the space, and they shared vulnerable moments so that we could do exactly what you said, Warwick, so that we could humanize those that have been dehumanized, because it's just not right. Every human being has a right to be happy and safe and feel included. And so Melanin Stories Matter was this journey that I went on with a group of incredible people. And we would even talk about the fact that as a host, I was the white elephant in the room. Let's talk about this, because it was the white elephant that needed to hear these stories, because you can't hear a story of this kind human being who's being surrounded by a bunch of white supremacists in a 7-Eleven and dehumanized without going, So that's taking now storytelling and using it for social advocacy.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's so powerful. I mean, you're right. Everybody, I mean, racism is endemic in pretty much every culture I'm aware of. It's whether it's Northern Ireland, in that case, it's not so much the color of the skin. It's because you're Catholic, you must be bad, or you're Protestant, or even because you have a different religion, therefore I'm going to kill you or something. You must be awful. I mean, it's
gender identity, sexual identity. There's so many, isms.
Right. And so, what you're
silly.
doing is try to humanize, because I think, I'm assuming it's our belief that if you humanize somebody, it makes it, it's still, if you really try, you can always be racist. But as you humanize folks, it starts to break down some of those barriers. Because, when you break it all down, we all want to, care for people, protect our families, help our kids, help our wives, partner, husbands. We have dreams, hopes. There's a lot more that unites us about being human than divides us. And by sharing stories, that's a way of saying, you know what? I can identify, even though I may be so different, I can identify with what that person's saying, at least an element of it. Does that make sense? So I think, by telling stories, you help bring people together. It's not going to solve everything, but to me, even helping a little bit, it's a start. It's a start, right? And so thank you for what you're doing. That's really an important mission. And thank you for everything you're doing in Story Fruition. I mean, left brain is all good, but, we want to share people's stories and don't forget what Melissa's advocating for those, obviously, with families, parents. Try and get your parents and loved ones to share their stories. Don't lose that. That's part of what makes us us, So write them down. But thank you for being an advocate for stories, because that's part of what makes us human. Part of what binds every culture is stories. If we don't tell stories, we don't know who we are. We lose that. And so thank you. I mean, that's, I think, really important work. So thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you, universe. I mean, I'm definitely doing the work I'm supposed to be doing. I know that hands down. So it took a little journey to get there.
That sounds like an excellent place to wrap up an episode of the podcast that's about second act significance. Listener, we have been talking about the importance of story in the context of pursuing second act significance. And in addition to our guest, Melissa Reaves, our host, Warwick Fairfax, has a little experience in that realm as well. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard on the podcast, listener, a couple things that you can do to find out more about the stories that Warwick has lived. One, His book, Crucible Leadership, Embrace Your Trials to Lead a Life of Significance, is filled of stories, not just of his own crucible experiences, but some of those things he teased a little bit in this episode, some of the stories he and his dad shared about history, some fascinating things in the book about that, all told in story. And speaking of stories, Warwick tells his story and has been doing so on a speaking tour that has been sort of intermissioned right now, but he's about to go back out and do some more speaking. If you would like to find out more about how you can get Warwick to come speak to your group, you can find that at our website, crucibleleadership.com. There's a speaking tab you can click on. You'll see actually a very nice little video of Warwick speaking, or some highlights of Warwick speaking. And you will also be able to reach our speaking agent at Crucible Leadership, Carrie Childers. Also at crucibleleadership.com. The book I mentioned earlier, Warwick's book, it's available there as well. I think I've done all of the marketing homework here, Melissa. As an expert, you can tell me if I did. I think I covered it all. So I will leave it, listeners. I will leave you with this. We understand, we know, you've heard it here on this show from Melissa and from Warwick. We know that crucible experiences are difficult. We know that starting the second act can be difficult, but we also know that starting the second act can be enormously rewarding. It can lead to enormous significance, because if you learn the lessons of your crucible, if you press into that which brings your heart alive, if you press into that which you were created for, if you press into that that takes your skills and talents, and you can leverage what you've learned in your crucible, recognizing that what happened didn't happen to you, it happened for you, you can chart a course to a new story, since we're talking about stories. And the great thing about that story that you can get on the journey toward is that it ends in a life of significance.